Hello and welcome to another of PAVE's weekly virtual discussion panels. My name is Ed Niedermeyer. I am the Director of Communications here at Partners for Automated Vehicle Education, and I'd like to thank you all for making the time to be with us here today. Today's topic is a fascinating and extremely important one, dealing as it does with sort of emerging trends in both automotive consumption, but new technology as well, regulation, safety, a bunch of really important issues. The title of today's discussion is Follow the Data, How Driver Assistance Can Improve Pedestrian Safety. Joining me today to discuss this topic, we have three of the best qualified people, I think, to help us understand the ins and outs of the various dynamics here. From MIT Age Lab, we have Brian Raymer. Brian, welcome.
Thank you.
And from GHSA, Governor's Highway Safety Association, excuse me, Russ Martin. Russ, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
And from Consumer Reports, Kelly Funkhouser. Kelly, welcome.
Hi, hello.
So the title of today's conversation starts with Follow the Data. And that's what I'd like to start the conversation is with the data. I think it's oftentimes easy to think of automation as being a cool whiz-bang thing, but the reality is that safety equipment needs to solve real safety problems. And in order to understand how to do that, we need to understand what those safety problems are. Russ, I'm going to start with you because GHSA does so much work to collect and analyze the data around this. But I think all of our guests will have some thoughts on this first question. But when you look at the data specifically around pedestrian and cyclist injuries on American roads, what do you see? What jumps out to you as sort of being the biggest sort of dangers and places where bad things are happening?
Well, thank you again for having us. I'm sorry to report we are in the midst of a pedestrian safety crisis, and that unfortunately is not just hyperbole. Every year, GHSA collects data from our members, and we're able to do preliminary analysis of fatal injuries for various issues. And we've been doing a series of reports on pedestrian fatality data. And what we found is that, we're estimating rather, is that in 2020, we had a dramatic increase in the pedestrian fatality rate compared to previous years. A lot of that's due to dropping VMT that we experienced in 2020, but we were already in a bad situation even before the pandemic was occurring. And that's not just in the last couple of years. Over the last decade, the number of pedestrian fatalities has increased dramatically more than other fatalities. So proportionally, we're seeing more of those kinds of deaths. So there's a huge problem out there, and we need to find solutions to address it.
Yeah, Kelly, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well, and maybe you could start to sort of take it from that, what the data is saying into sort of maybe where the areas where some driver assistance can start to help, because maybe the technology we have today may not be able to solve all those problems, but so where do you see that convergence between the problem and potential solutions?
Yeah, so 2/3 of the fatalities for pedestrian or for vehicle fatalities are pedestrians. That's huge, right? So it's more of an exterior pedestrian type of a problem than it really is about the in-vehicle occupant safety. Cars in 2021 are relatively safe. They do pretty well on the crash tests, and they even have crash avoidance features. But there's not a whole lot being done to protect the other roadway users, particularly pedestrians. And we are seeing advances in automatic emergency braking is one. Just under a year from now, I'm very excited. September 1, 2022, all vehicles that are made will have standard automatic emergency braking built into the cars. And this was done not through regulation, but as a voluntary industry agreement. So I applaud the industry for taking that step and committing to making vehicles safer. But we're now seeing that automatic emergency braking is effective for, preventing those vehicle-to-vehicle collisions. There is quite a dramatic reduction in those types of collisions. But the problem is, again, with the pedestrians, right? So if you have a 5 to 10 mile per hour bumper to bumper type of, fender bender. There's not going to be a whole lot of physical and structural damage to those vehicles. But if you're hitting another roadway user, pedestrian, cyclist, those types of injuries and fatalities are going to be much more severe and in larger numbers, just by the nature of not having metal on metal, and our bodies and the tissue and everything, it's not as stable. And so we're hoping that the industry will even take one more step and add pedestrian detection and braking into their automatic emergency braking systems going forward as well, because those are the ones that really matter. Those are the more disastrous outcomes. So we're hoping to see that. We're seeing improvements in the technology, and I think that it can advance even more. And I'd love to see that happen relatively soon as well.
And Brian, I'm wondering sort of what are some of the technological tools that might be sort of deployed to take AEB from something, just for one example, or other forms of driver assistance, from something that does a really good job at preventing vehicle-to-vehicle collisions and really sort of fills that gap that Kelly just mentioned when it comes to pedestrian safety.
So I think that when we think about pedestrian protection systems, we can begin very much to think about the extension from AEB very easily, and in employing, at the end of the day, more automation, with stronger sensing around the vehicle to detect pedestrians, bicyclists, and other road users out there, and begin to break and mitigate that situation. Now, we also need to think about, various passive safety approaches. Hoods for vehicles have long been designed with roof structure standards so that, in essence, if we do get hit, you get hit much easier. But I think we need to take a step back and remember that it is not a technology alone solution. Automation in and of itself today is reshaping the kinematics of driving. That means that all the automatic transmissions, anti-lock braking systems, and all the support that we are employing to make driving easier is perhaps reducing the amount of skill and situational awareness that is needed on a moment-to-moment basis. I'm a cyclist, an avid cyclist by nature. I spend an enormous amount of time, on the back of a bike on roads. And, based upon this conversation, we all know it's probably not a good idea. Probably better off staying a long way away from the roads. But, we'd like to blame it on distraction and inattentive driving. But at the end of the day, it's not just that. It is a broad lack of situational understanding and situational awareness that perhaps has been exacerbated by our last 18 plus months of looking at screens. And perhaps we're not even developing the tools anymore and requiring that we begin to think about really what is the driver-vehicle interaction need to look like, both from the driver's side to ensure that the driver is situationally aware, and also from the other road users. Just the other day, I got awful close to a road user sitting in the middle of the road taking a picture. You don't come around a corner expecting to find someone standing in the middle of the road, even when you're looking straight ahead and paying full attention to what's going on in front of you. So it's a shared responsibility situation that we need to very much look at increasing folks' situational awareness, whether the drivers, cyclists, or other road users, walking bystanders, etc.
Yeah, and Kelly, I was gonna ask you. I mean, we're seeing a lot of sort of the advances in driver assistance are sort of in things that kind of tend to take more control away from the driver, more automate more things that might otherwise keep the driver more engaged. And I think against the backdrop of what Brian just described, that's a little maybe even a little troubling. What are your thoughts on that and sort of the efforts to kind of rein in some of the risk that he's describing there?
Yeah, so, there's kind of this differentiation between these active safety systems that are really the blind spot monitors, the automatic emergency braking, the forward collision warning, those types of systems, and then those convenience systems that are more likely to, relieve some stress or make driving easier. And those are things like adaptive cruise control and the sustained lane keeping assist type features. And in combination of those two, the ACC and the LKA, that really does relieve the driver of a lot of the dynamic driving task. And they're then, left to supervise or monitor the system for potential failures or a need to take over an emergency situation. But as humans, that's really boring. It's literally just like watching paint dry, right? It's going to keep doing its thing. And the more that you've experienced it behaving correctly and performing well, the more likely you're even, then to give up the reliance onto the system. And so at Consumer Reports, we actually just last week announced to manufacturers that we will be making changes to our scoring requirements for next year. And those vehicles that come equipped with the adaptive cruise control and a sustained lane keeping feature, if those are on at the same time, there needs to be a safeguard in place, like direct driver monitoring. And direct is at this point in time, the camera based, whether that's vision or infrared, those types of monitors that really, at a minimum, make sure the driver is awake and looking towards the forward roadway. We're not even, to the point of having any other performance metrics of scanning the mirrors and your environment. At a minimum, you got to make sure that driver's, looking towards the forward roadway. And so we're going to be enacting that change next year.
Yeah, and Russ.
And yeah, I'd like you to chime in here.
Oh, sure.
Go for it, Russ.
Oh, sure. Well, I was going to say, Kelly's absolutely correct. I mean, you have this level of that starts, level 2, level 3, and then sort of goes up. And this idea that we can just surf up the scale sort of seamlessly. But I don't know if that's the case, because when you start to give drivers permission to not pay attention a little bit, there are always going to be people out there who are not going to pay attention at all. And if there's this gulf that exists between those active safety features, which I think really will make a big difference, and then the stuff that takes over substantial parts of the driving task, and once you get into that, I think it raises really fundamental questions, really profound questions about, like, what does it mean to be driving, and what is my role as the operator and the car? And I don't know if we've talked about that all that much, and we need to talk about that gulf. If it exists, what is how can we quantify it? And we got to tackle that head on, because if we don't really talk about these issues, this is not going to all work out very well, because people are just going to be misunderstanding what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, so, and I'd like to circle back to, Consumer Reports' effort with driver monitoring. And I think it really needs to be, very much driver monitoring and driver support systems. And some of you may recall that about 2 years ago on my Forbes blog, I called for the industry to, much like AEB, proactively agree to bring camera-based driver monitoring in with level 2 systems. And I think it is a really important feature to get right. And it is not about monitoring, it is really about using that monitoring technology to support the driver to make better moment-to-moment decisions. We need somebody tapping us on the shoulder and saying, hey, pay a little more attention now, or the driving situation may be a little too demanding for what you want to do. But I think we need to take a step back for a moment. The conversation moves very easily to level 2 features where we are really giving up control. The reshaping of kinematics in driving is well before level 2 gets involved. I mean, the vast majority of the consumers out there aren't leveraging level 2 automation systems at the current time. And even if they are, it is only a very, very, very small percentage of the time when we're faced with pedestrians and pedestrian vulnerabilities. I'm not saying it's not happening, but it's the rounding error right now, and that will change with GM's announcements with Ultra Cruise, somewhere where Tesla's going, et cetera, but change slowly. The kinematics of driving have been shifted by the use of automation and systems that we are really ignoring in the foundations today. This is power steering. This is automatic transmissions. This is the fact that driving is easier fundamentally today than it's ever has been. We are more isolated because the cabin of the vehicle is so quiet, so we can listen to that sound system, so we can enjoy the ride. The ride feels smooth. This is automation all around us, doing lots of different things, from managing, the vibrations within the car, the sounds of the engine. Most of the engines don't sound exactly what we want. We're using automation and enhancing that sound in these situations. And the suspension being tuned in real time by automation. So we're reshifting our comfort and our trust in this protective barrier around us, and forgetting we're moving at high speeds at certain times through a vastly changing environment. And everybody in that environment is assuming that the driver is fully aware of what's going on. And even if we can be fully aware, just as I said the other, opening, you go around a curve and all of a sudden there's something in complete failure of your expectations. That at the end of the day is not the driver's fault. The driver should never have been put into the situation of detecting someone standing in the middle of the road. That's not where you should be standing. So it's a shared effect of all parties involved.
I think that it's not all bad. I don't want to put a dark cloud over all of the advancing technology. Just using AEB as an example, the benefits, are pretty astounding for, in my opinion, a fairly, simple, definitely not engineers on the line. I know you did hard work, but it's a very good technology, and there are others out there, blind spot warning, forward collision warning, all these others that are improving safety. We know that through accident data, through fatality data. And so I think rather than, saying that new technology is always bad, I think that it's just new technology is creating a different frame of mind and reference. And it's shifting responsibilities of the driver. It's not alleviating responsibilities, it's just changing them. And so, all of these sensors and cameras and everything on our cars are great, because now we can rely on the car to supplement our own blind spots as humans, whether those are physical blind spots because of the cars, or otherwise. We can't necessarily tell how far away a car is, right? But our radar can, and we can't tell the speed of an upcoming car in our blind spot, but our sonars and ultrasounds and radars can, and that's great. And so this shift in responsibility is good, but I want to point out that we're also seeing negative improvements to vehicles. I have some numbers here that I just jotted down before this. So physical changes in cars, we are seeing that the hood height of vehicles since the year 2000 has increased in height by 11%. The Ford F-250, the hood height of that vehicle, has increased 55 inches in height, okay? In addition to that, pickup trucks are 24% heavier. So we are literally creating more blind spots, and heavier cars mean longer stopping distances, right? And so we're having all of these benefits of technology, but we're almost in a way, moving backwards in terms of, our own human, abilities to detect and drive safely and know what's going on in our surroundings. So pedestrians, if you can't see them in front of your car, you almost have to rely on the technology at this point, because you physically can't see over the hood of your car. I mean, children, anything, small animals, anything like that comes out into the road unexpectedly, like Brian was saying, you have to now rely on the technology. And so I think that there needs to be some improvements, also going back to, just the physical makeup of vehicles, that I think we can do a lot more to increase our situational awareness by increasing visibility. So we're seeing an improvement in the technology, but unfortunately now that's taking place of some of the things that we had before.
And don't at all consider my words here to be negative about the technology. I'm actually very, very, very positive about the technology, but there are unintended consequences of how we are shifting the technology. Now, from the best side of engineering, we build technology based upon a specification. And at the end of the day, a hope or a prayer that the environment that we put it into actually works within the specification that we design. And that's why, in one sense, I started the Advanced Vehicle Technologies Consortium at MIT to really try to understand how people are using these technologies in real life. There is a huge mismatch between designers' views of the world and how people eventually use these technologies. And it's quite amazing how consumers at the end of the day extrapolate beyond the design of the technology or fail to benefit from the technology. And only by working together as an industry can we really get a grasp on what's going on in the real world. But I think, Kelly, you hit on something really important here. We are dealt with the laws of physics here. We can't shift that. The car can only stop so fast. As cars get heavier, and this is a problem with our push for electrification, batteries are not light. As we begin to change the center of mass more, we have to realize that there are going to be consequences of the rapid proliferation of heavier vehicles on the road. And it's not just the pedestrian topics that we're talking about today. The impact of heavy electrified vehicles on the infrastructure is going to be huge. So, while I am an advocate here of a responsible move to carbon emissions, our push for battery electric vehicles needs to be balanced with a lot of extraneous factors here. The weight, energy, and the speed at which someone can stop. We're going to put a lot more reliance on, as Kelly mentioned, the sensing systems out there. But also remember that the roads are going to get a lot less smoother because they can't stand the weight of a semi-tractor trailer powered by battery electric driving along as quite as much, or the fact that all of the mass moving along is going to change. And that's what we got to be looking at these problems, not from a one-size-fits-all solution or the policy decision of today. Yesterday it was automation, today it's battery electric vehicles. No, it's the bigger issue. How do we develop human-centered systems that solve what we need? How do we develop energy independent solutions that manage the carbon footprint? As we've seen out of Toyota lately, and I'm a big fan of some of the words coming out, it's all about carbon. It's not about battery electric vehicles. And that's a really important piece for multiple, not just the fact that it's the raw materials going in the batteries, but we understand the braking force of lighter vehicles, and we can handle the kinematics there a little more effectively. So we've got to be thinking much bigger here.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't know how many of the sort of issues around sort of how to develop more human-centric systems we'll be able to get into with our limited time. But Russ, the human part of auto safety has always been both the kind of dominant part and the hardest part. And just as illustration, I mean, huge percentage of road deaths still to this day involve unbelted people. And yet, what a huge effort it took just to convince people, put on your seatbelts, just in the numbers that we have today. Now, I know GHSA has a really long record of trying to address that piece of it, right? The human part of it, because the technology and the systems, that's going to be what it's going to be. But this is something that in our public discourse, we can actually start to address. Can you just give us a little bit of GHSA's sort of perspective on how to address that and maybe sort of some of the lessons of the past that we can apply to this problem?
Well, that's a huge question. I'm sorry to say, I don't know if there's a silver bullet. I think at the very least, we do know that humans, as usual, are a bit of a weak link in all this. And it's something that we need to address. And it's one thing to devise these systems in a sort of Brian hit the nail on the head. It's one thing to devise these systems in sort of an engineering environment. It's another thing to unleash it in the wild with regular consumers and all the things that they will figure out how to do or misuse. And we got to foresee all that stuff because you just look at the history of auto safety and you can see it happen then, it happens today, probably continue to happen. And the only way we're going to reap the safety benefits of this technology is to factor that stuff into it very deeply. Like I said, there's this thought that, well, we'll just build these systems and put it out there and people will surf up the scale of automation. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. So from our perspective, well, some of the things that we try to do, I mean, in highway safety, certainly you have sort of the traffic enforcement, but part of it, but we're really just trying to, it's more akin to getting people to buckle the seatbelt, I think. And that's really a culture thing. It's trying to figure out what sort of appeals to people from a cultural perspective. And I think we can do that with these technologies. We sell the right story and show people how these technologies can benefit them and keep them and everyone safe, but at the same time, making it very clear what their responsibilities are. And maybe that goes back to some of the things we've been talking about, certainly PAVE has talked about, and this community has been talking about for quite some time. It's how do we talk about what these systems are and what they do? Maybe we shouldn't be calling some of these things automation. Maybe we should call it driver assistance or driver support, or maybe there's a better way to talk about these things that don't imply this loss of responsibility or this surrender of responsibility for the driving task, because there's this adage of there's no substitute for an engaged driver, and for some of these systems, I think we're still kind of in that place, unfortunately.
I mean,
Russ, I think you're hitting a really important piece here, and it fell out of some of our early ABT research, and I'm going to call Kelly here and advertise for her in particular. Kelly has put a lot of effort into the clearing the confusion document, trying to get naming conventions and insights straight, and it is really, really needed. And we saw it in some of our early ABT work on how much confusion there was 3-4 years ago, and it's great to see research turned into practice and driven home by the team consumer parts in partnership with everybody from NHTSA to AAA and IHS and others out there. And Kelly can give you the full list here.
And PAVE.
But and PAVE. I lose track of all the names. But the consumer is left, in many cases, underutilizing the technology that they purchased, underappreciative of it, under understanding of it, and not primed to benefit from the investments. And we need to change that paradigm. PAVE exists around AV education, but it's a broader issue. Lifelong driver education is a piece that I wrote about years ago, is a gap. It is a huge gap in states and federal jurisdictions over licensure, car ownership, right to repair, lots of different topics thrown into here. The reality is we do need some minimal level of lifelong driver education, at least introduces terms, brings people back to just at least grasp enough that they can go buy a car or they can get in a car and they should understand the language of today. And there's some really interesting steps that could be taken to do this with a light policy response, but yet a socially responsible policy response. Driving is a right. Driving is a privilege, not a right.
So,
yeah,
Brian,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, you use a lot of these systems. I'd love to get your thoughts, particularly in sort of that education piece. How do you help someone just get into a car and use these complex systems that they may not fully understand?
Well, exactly, is they get into a car and then help them use it. So I'm taking a different approach actually on this education. I think that the false advertising or ambiguous naming actually hurts individuals and organizations like the government and regulators and those that are writing policy and on that side of the things, but not so much for consumers. Consumers get in a car and you could have educated them until the cows come home. But once you get in the car and you have your first experience, it all goes out the window, literally. And you just know what you know now, right? So education is important for consumers to teach them about the safety technologies so that they can get those, but less about how they necessarily work and interact, especially with all of the differences in how they're implemented across the market. What matters more to consumers is that they are designed in a way that safeguards them as users from those, those foreseeable misuses, and educates them in the moment when they're using those systems. And it should be intuitive to use them. You shouldn't have to rely on all of this education for drivers. We're not going to go and make everyone get a new, driver's license or take courses. That's just absolutely unrealistic. So we need to make them designed intuitively so that the drivers understand enough about what the system is doing and sensing and seeing and how it's behaving, so that if it makes a mistake, the drivers can then, watch for it and then take over. So it's more of a team effort rather than pound it into the consumers. You must learn, you must pay attention, even though it's doing all of these things. We all know you shouldn't text and drive and eat dessert before dinner, but we all do it anyway. Just because we're told something isn't enough. You must have a safeguard in place to prevent the foreseeable misuses. And that is absolutely what is necessary. And that's on the manufacturers and that's on regulators. But the regulators are getting the misinformation sometimes by how they're advertised or marketed. And so there really is just this giant confusion of what's real and who needs what.
Yeah, so we're just about.
Kelly, I think.
Go ahead.
I say, Kelly, I think you're hitting on an important point here. We are ripe to learn at the point of decision. We are really poor learners offline. We muddle through our smartphones when I want to figure something out now. We need the tools in the car to help us when we want it. So you're going to parallel park. That's the time you're ripe to learn around the assisted parking features. Driver monitoring is a really important way of ensuring that we are within the bounds when we learn, but we're not going to go to the books offline. Consumers are not going to sit down and study the old-fashioned way. So how do we kind of tap them on the shoulders? I don't want to say, write like the old Microsoft Clippy, because that was an annoying interface to many of us. But what was Microsoft trying to hit at? They were hitting at nudging effects. How do we nudge people to try and enlighten and engage in new ways? And the auto industry needs to embrace the concept of nudging to promote the proper utilization, promote proper attention, and promote learning opportunities. And I think that's the key there.
Yep, and that's a great note to end on. This has been just an absolutely fascinating conversation. It's so wonderful just for me to hear all this stuff. I'm getting educated along with everyone else. Thank you so much to our guests for sharing their deep knowledge and passion really for this issue and for the safety issues the human lives that are really behind it. So Russ Martin from GHSA, thanks so much for being here today. Kelly Funkhouser from Consumer Reports, thank you as always.
Thanks for having me.
And Brian Raymer of MIT, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights today.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you so much to our audience for once again making another important topic around automation and safety a priority in your busy day. We always appreciate the time that you spend with us. If you have friends or acquaintances who would enjoy this conversation but weren't able to make it live, it will be recorded on our YouTube page. We'll also be sharing clips and quotes from this session on our social media accounts, which you can find at PAVE Campaign or www.pavecampaign.org. Thank you again to everyone for participating today, and we'll see you again next week on another of PAVE's weekly virtual discussions.